Welcome to the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. If your job involves working with or influencing people's behavior, this podcast offers invaluable insights into what makes people tick. Through personal interviews that are thoughtful and surprising, we explore the full range of the roots to people smarts that can help you make or break your own career. My name is Marie Gervais, and with a PhD in culture and learning in the workplace and my own cultural journey, I bring the mysteries of human beings at work around the world to you. Through conversations with very diverse people, examining the groups they were born into and the ones they chose to belong to, my podcast takes a deep dive into why people do what they do and how they belong. Hone your skills to manage others and to be a better human being at work with the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. And now for today's episode. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Today, I'm very excited to present to you our new guest. Her name is Stephanie Brown, and she's the founder of Creative Career Level Up, a topic which is dear to my heart, as you all know. And she has a program that helps those in marketing, creative, and tech industries accelerate their careers and secure their next perfect role, along with a promotion and a salary increase, which is a bonus that we all want. Hundreds of professionals have gone through the program, securing roles in world-leading companies such as Apple, Nike, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Snap, and many other agencies and startups. Stephanie has spent the last 15 years working in the marketing, creative, and tech industries, and what makes her program stand out and a proven system is that she used her 13 years experience working as a senior marketing executive at Nike for 8 years and Apple for 5 years to develop the curriculum. She was able to retire early from her corporate job and launch her career coaching business after building a positively cash-flowing property portfolio within only 4 years. Her career path, however, has not always been rosy, and she has written a highly rated book, Fired: Why Losing Your Job is the Best Thing That Can Happen to You, in which she shares her experience of being fired twice and how the loss of the job was instrumental in advancing her career. Stephanie, I'm very excited to welcome you. Welcome.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction.
Well, I'm very interested in hearing more about you and your life. You must have been born somewhere. You probably have a family. So give us a few details of your personal life.
Sure. You may be trying to work out the accent if for people listening in. My accent is from New Zealand. So I am originally from New Zealand. I was born in New Zealand. I moved to the UK when I was 23 years old. And so I spent the bulk of my professional working life living and working in London. And so obviously a big change from New Zealand going to London. So that's sort of my journey in terms of where I've lived. In terms of my career, as you mentioned, I've worked in the corporate world for the bulk of my career and had the pleasure of working for big brands like Nike and Apple, which were wonderful companies to work for. And I feel very grateful to have had the experience of working there. And as many people do when they hit the middle of their lives and careers and they start to think about sort of what's next and what do I want to build and what do I want to give back for people, I developed this coaching platform, the Creative Career Level Up, where I help people in my industry, marketing in the creative industry, to secure their next role. And it's something I'm passionate about because I went through an experience myself. After I left Nike, I went to a role that didn't work out and I got legitimately let go from that role, so fired from that role, which is very different from being made redundant. Made redundant is when they take you into a room and say, your role's no longer available. We're sorry. But when you get let go on your own, it's more personal. It's much more, we don't want you to work here specifically. And I went through a really tough 8 months trying to, reconcile that experience and trying to work out what I wanted to do next with my career. I was unemployed, been a brand director at Nike, and within a few months after leaving to pursue this other opportunity, I got let go, and it was really hard for my confidence. And so the coaching program I developed and what I'm really passionate about now is helping people who haven't necessarily been let go from jobs, but who are at a point in their career where they're just like, where do I go from here? What is the point of my career? What do I want next? Where do I want to be in the future? And providing them with a sort of framework and structure to not only work out what that is, but to actually secure that. And, the best part of my day and my job is when one of my clients secures a role that they're super excited about and they've worked really hard for. So it's a wonderful thing to get to do full time.
It is, isn't it? When you get a chance to assist somebody in reaching their career goal, it's pretty significant.
Yeah, I honestly find it more rewarding than any career goals I achieved myself. It's such a beautiful experience to see someone have a dream, maybe not believe that they're capable of achieving it, and then go on a journey with them where you actually see them grow. You start to see them really believe that it's possible, and then they actually secure it. It's probably like parenting, watching your children go through those stages, but you do feel very proud of people that you work with, and it's a beautiful journey to be on and so incredibly rewarding.
It is, and probably related to the motivating power of purpose and of being able to be of service to another person in achieving that purpose. It's quite a powerful motivator.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is.
So let's go into your childhood a little bit. Let's think of a couple of incidents that stand out for you, either positive or negative, that have to do with you growing up into your own leadership and cultural sense of self. What stands out for you?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, I had a pretty great upbringing, I'll be honest. When you get older, you meet people from all different walks of life and you hear people's different stories. And it really, if you have an upbringing like mine, really makes you appreciate the childhood that you had. So there was certainly nothing big or traumatic that I can talk about in my childhood, but there were definitely moments that I look back and I realized that the lessons it taught me. And, I changed schools when I was 15. I grew up in a very small town in New Zealand. I changed schools when I was 15 from the Catholic high school in my town to the all-girls school. And, being a 15-year-old girl, you can imagine it's quite a difficult time to be changing schools. 15 is a challenging age with friendships and cliques and who's cool and who's not. And, it's a really challenging time. And my mother really wanted me to change schools. She sort of saw more opportunity for me at the all-girls school. And she was right. And I remember thinking, it's quite scary, but, what's the worst that could happen? And I remember thinking to myself, like, the worst that could happen is, you go to the school, you make no friends, and maybe even worse, you make no friends, but people don't like you. And I'd been relatively popular at my previous school, but I had a lot of friends, I got along with people. So I just thought, there's no way that's going to happen. So I changed schools and that did happen. I came to this new school. I really struggled to make friends. There was a group of girls that I sort of fell into and they bullied me quite a lot. If you've met 15-year-old girl bullies, they're really mean.
I've experienced them.
They're really mean. They're the worst type
They're
of
mean
bully.
from the time they're 9 years old and beyond.
Absolutely. And it's so psychological, isn't it? It's really like, It gets in your head. I kind of look back and I'm like, oh, I wish it had been boy bullying. I wish someone had just hit me rather than sort of messed with my mind like that. And it was really, really hard. And I had a year at that school where I not only had no friends, but I was bullied by these girls who I was trying to be friends with. And it was really challenging. And so, I'd left from this other school and the worst outcome that I thought could happen actually did happen. And it was challenging. But then those girls left the next year and I had 2 more years left at that school. And it was a chance to sort of reinvent myself and to make new friends without their bullying nature at the school. And I did. I made wonderful friends. The next 2 years of my life at this high school was incredible. And it taught me 2 things. It taught me, one, that the only way to get over a fear is to face it head on and realize that either it's never as bad as what you think it's going to be, or the worst does happen, but you survive. And for me, it was the latter. The worst possible outcome happened and I did get through it. And not only that, when I got through it to the other side, the next 2 years was so incredibly wonderful. And the second lesson I took from that was that, I changed schools and it was really hard, but I got through it and I thrived in the 2 years after that. And it sort of taught me that you don't always have to be where your friends are. I left that other school where I had lots of friends and I went somewhere and I sort of took a chance on that opportunity. And you don't always have to be where your friends are. And I think I have always been not afraid to go and do something that's a bit different from what everyone else was doing. Go overseas when no one else was going overseas, go to a university that nobody else went to, take opportunities that I was doing by myself. And I think that's been a big part of my story and certainly what's helped to shape a lot of my life.
That school changing experience helped you to become detached from the idea that you needed to have friends to be successful somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of taught me that, you can build friends. You can even build friends who become like family wherever you go. One of the instances of going overseas, I went on exchange to Milan in Italy, and it was the last semester of university and I was really scared about going over there. And for anyone that's ever done like an exchange program, the people on exchange become like family to you because you're all overseas on your own. And I remember that experience. I was like, yeah, wherever you go, you'll build relationships where people can be friends. They can be friends that feel like family. There'll be people that become really close to you, and you can reinvent that and find that anywhere if you look for it. And that is really comforting when you want to make big moves in your life, like changing countries, like going on an exchange program. If you're scared of how you're going to endure that and if that your friends aren't going to be there, then you probably will never take those opportunities. But because I had this experience at 15, and that was quite, traumatic for my young self at the time. It did teach me these lessons, like it'll be okay. You'll make new friends. You'll find a place wherever you go. And therefore, you should take the opportunity to do things that maybe seem a bit scary, but trust that they'll work out and be okay.
Mm-hmm. That was my next question. What happened when you were a young adult? I mean, you went on this student exchange to Milan. And so that was a different kind of experience because you didn't go on this exchange and then have everybody reject you or bully you, right? It was more of a positive experience.
100%. Yeah. I think exchange programs by nature are pretty positive experience. Everyone's there for a really short period of time. You've got people from all over the world, all different languages. It's just a wonderful melting pot of cultures and people. And it's really quick. Usually it's a semester for most people. It's over and done with really quickly. So you sort of get thrown in. I don't think there's really time for people to be cliquey or mean to each other. I think everyone's just so excited about meeting new people and building new relationships. And I think the nature of the kind of people that go and have experiences like that is there's definitely a bit of a thread of like-mindedness in there in terms of people wanting to meet new people and appreciate different cultures. And so, yeah, it was a wonderful experience. And I was homesick. I was really, really homesick, but not to the detriment of the experience. I think just the nature of being 21 years old and on the other side of the world for the first time.
Mm-hmm. There are some student exchanges where you go first to another side of the country, a different social class, people who are quite different from you, and then you go to another country. And I've spoken to several people who were in one of those exchange programs called Katimovic, and they said that going somewhere in your own country was much harder than going to another country because you're expecting things to be similar and to be understandable and for people to behave in ways that you would expect because you're coming from your own country, but they don't.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Have you experienced that?
I mean, I'm from New Zealand, so it's pretty small. I mean, when I was growing up, I think we had 3 million people. I think we're at 5 million now. So we don't have huge differences like you would experience in the US. I think there's a lot more similarities just because of the nature of it being such a small country. But certainly even within a country, any country, there's going to be cultural differences and things like that. But yeah, probably more like a state of America versus the differences in a country of your size.
Well, I'm in Canada. So
you're in Canada.
Yeah.
Well, even Canada's pretty big.
It's big but empty. So
yeah.
But yeah, there's a culture change even when you go from one street to the next.
Yeah.
So there are always things that change or that are unexpected, and especially social class. So if you were in one middle class or higher or lower class and you go into another one, it's a big culture shock no matter where you are.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So when you were born into New Zealand culture, what are some of the things about being in New Zealand and being born there that you think contributed to your sense of leadership and culture? And that can also span other groups that you were born into. For example, a sports-oriented family, or it could have a religious context, or there may be a language context, or some other kind of a context that has to do with where you were that influenced your sense of who you are.
Yeah, I think as a Kiwi, there are some threads of personalities that sort of run through New Zealand if you're being general. And I think being a small country where people are pretty humble from New Zealand, we're a humble country by nature. And so I think people realize our place in the world. And so we're always trying to kind of achieve bigger than what the country should achieve, if that makes sense. We try and punch above our weight a little bit. And I think nationally we try to do that. But I think as an individual, I've sort of appreciated that when you go out into the world, when you move to a city like London, you're the underdog a little bit because you haven't grown up with all those opportunities that people in Europe have, or people in the US or Canada, or even people in Australia. It's a much bigger country and there's just more opportunities. So I think there's a definite sense of underdog, sense of wanting to achieve more than would be possible back home that comes with that. But in terms of my own family, my father grew up pretty poor, and he's from a big family, and there was a lot of love in their family, but not a lot of resources. And so when we were growing up, my dad really instilled in us a sense of hard work, and him and all of his siblings actually succeeded very well career-wise, especially in light of where they came from a family standpoint. And so, dad was really very vocal in sort of wanting us to take opportunities like university. He never got the chance to go to university, and I know he would have loved to have gone to university. So he really wanted that for us, and he really wanted to instill a work ethic in us. He had a restaurant that he ran. He was a chef back in the day, and we had a family restaurant, and my sister and I were working that restaurant from, I think I was 8 years old when I started working in there, and she was 11. And for Dad, it was like he really wanted us to learn skills, and he really wanted us to learn the value of sort of hard work, so that we always had those skills to fall back on. And I think that was important for him, given the background that he came from. So that was definitely a bit of a theme growing up as well, and something I can see in all of my siblings. There's four of us, and I think all of us are pretty hardworking, and that was definitely something we got from our parents.
Mm-hmm. And you probably picked up a lot of things about people, and in a restaurant, you notice things about people that you wouldn't see otherwise. Do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the cafe we had, I think probably for me, the most interesting thing was when I was sort of 11, 12, I used to work there every weekend. I was working with adults, alongside women in their 20s and 30s and I was I wasn't even a teenager yet. And so it was really interesting being in a work environment at such a young age. And you do pick up more people, you form relationships with people that you would never usually meet. And then in later years, I worked in a more sort of upmarket winery in our town. And I always enjoyed meeting people from around the world, particularly at Christmas time, which is obviously summer here in New Zealand. There'll be a lot of visitors to town from all over the world. And I always used to love asking people where they're from and what are you doing here, and sort of picking their brains about overseas and what was out there in the world. So I just sort of always had this curiosity about the world and what was out there. And I was so excited about getting out into the world and seeing it when I finally did finish school.
And so that's pretty interesting. So you got the work ethic from your dad, and also this sense that, there were different social classes, that when people don't come from a background where they feel there's a disadvantage, they don't notice the social class so much. They just consider it the norm that everybody has what they want and can do whatever they want when they want to. So you would have noticed that. And then the sense of New Zealand humility, and sometimes feeling like you had to prove that you had capacity because you were a small country with mighty capacity. Did I get that right so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So what about when you got older and you went to different countries, you learned different things, you became a marketing professional, a very well established and successful one who worked for large companies that are well known around the world. Their brands are certainly recognizable. So what have you adopted into your sense of leadership and culture as a result of those other experiences?
Yeah, I think definitely working in marketing in the creative industry. I don't know if I planned it out as much as I'd like to think I did. I don't think I fell into it. I did study business when I was at school, but I had looked at sort of finance and economics as a career when I finished university. And then I had this opportunity to work at marketing for a sports company in New Zealand before I went to London. And then about a year after I got to London, I got my job at Nike. So I ended up in sort of marketing the creative industry and the sports industry as well, which is an industry I love. And I think I really found my tribe in that industry, particularly in marketing in the creative industry. My business now, I focus on working with people in marketing in the creative industry. And obviously I have experience in that industry, but I do it in part because I really feel like I understand creative people. I love being around creative people. I just find that I have a lot in common with them. And that's something that I feel very lucky that I found this industry of people where I really fitted in, and the creative side of myself could really be expressed, which I think was wonderful. And when it comes to leadership, leading in environments like that, I feel really passionately about the sports industry, particularly at Nike. It's a real culture of coaching and mentoring, coaching coming from the sports industry. Even Nike as a company was started by a coach and his students. So there's a beautiful culture within Nike of building high performing teams, but building leaders that are more like coaches. And I had some incredible leaders in my time at Nike who I look back now and realize that wasn't necessarily the norm in every workplace. I just sort of assumed every workplace built great leaders like that. And I feel so lucky that I got to work under them, because they taught me a lot about how I wanted to lead. And so much of that was ingrained in the culture of sport.
Well, the culture of sport has come under a lot of attack recently. At least in the news here. I mean, we have a lot of sexual harassment and racism and lots of issues that have caused a number of sports federations to be seen in a very bad light in Canada. What was seen to be an untouchable institution, the National Hockey Institute, has been completely defamed and disbanded and restarted and lost all of their corporate sponsors because of their behavior. But when you talk to people who are in sports, they frequently don't have any inclination of that. They just love sport and like the game and enjoy the experience of it and really identify with it. You don't have that kind of an experience where there was that kind of a disconnect of inequity?
I mean, I think what you're describing there can happen in any organization. I don't think that's a characteristic of sports organizations necessarily. I think there's plenty of organizations outside of sport where that kind of stuff happens. I think when I talk about the culture of sport, it's more that sport can bring people together. It's something that people feel incredibly passionate about. You see the Olympic Games every 4 years, the way people come together and are inspired around the human potential through sport, like what people can achieve with sport and what people can achieve when they have a coach who can, help them get to their potential. I think that's what I mean when I talk about the culture of sport, what it stands for as an industry in terms of that sort of stuff, as opposed to, some of those other things, which I think, can definitely happen in any organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gymnastics, soccer, you would probably call it football, hockey here. There's so many of the sport federations have come under attack for their behavior. There was the recent forced kiss of a tennis star who was trying to push the person away. Has now been taken away from his position. There's so many things like that are negative, but at the same time, if you look at sport culture from what it was intended to be, and the reason Olympic Games even were started so many years ago, it really is a unifying element and something that people can grow together and build passion around and camaraderie and learn to work in teams.
Yeah, I was in London during the 2012 Olympic Games, and there was a lot of conversation before the games about, a lot of Londoners were going to leave because it was going to be so hectic and busy, and people were not negative about it, but they were certainly concerned about the impact of the infrastructure and how busy it was going to be for Londoners trying to go about their daily lives. And then the 2 weeks of the Olympic Games were just like nothing I'd ever seen before in terms of human beings connecting and being together. Londoners really stepped up and felt like hosts to the world. They really, you would be on the tube, the underground, where typically Londoners ignore each other, never speak to each other, and people were talking to each other. People were asking that hear foreign accents. They'd be like, "Where are you guys from? Welcome to our city." I've never seen Londoners like that before, and it was so wonderful. And obviously all around you, you've got the sport going on. There's a lot of sports that were free. You could go to Hyde Park and watch the triathlon. You could watch the road race out on the streets. There was a lot of stuff that you could actually go and see without a ticket. And people really got behind it. And you could just feel the energy in the city those 2 weeks. Sport just brings people together. It brings that passion together. It's just one of the things we have in the world, which is heartbreaking when people lose. And there's so many moments that break hearts in sport, but then there's so much inspiration in it as well. And yeah, the 2 weeks of the London Olympics were just phenomenal in terms of seeing how human beings reacted to it. And I think for me, that was the evidence I needed to confirm what I already thought, which was that, sport brings people together and can be a force for good in the world.
And it gives people hope. I was in Haiti after the earthquake. I have a Haitian daughter-in-law, and we went after the earthquake to help with her mother's not-for-profit for about 2 months. And while we were there was the big FIFA World Cup happening, and it was the first time I saw the Haitians looking hopeful. And people were talking all the time about the different matches that were happening, and people were gathering for different reasons, no matter where they were, how they were, in all ages. And they really bonded and felt like they could move forward because they got some energy from being a part of the games, and feeling like they could still connect even though they'd been in such difficult circumstances.
Yeah, that's a great example. And there was actually a piece of content that Nike Spain put out. I think it was around 2009. Obviously, the world was going through a quite deep recession with the global financial crisis, but Spain was suffering quite a lot. And the Spanish Nike team put out a piece of content sort of celebrating all the great athletes that Spain had at the time, because actually maybe it was after 2010 because they won the World Cup, but they'd won the European football, they won the World Cup. They had Rafa Nadal, the tennis player, who was winning tons of Grand Slams. They had world champions and like 10 or 12 different sports, and they really wanted to sort of send this message like, let this be the light and the hope that brings our country back. Like, let's celebrate these amazing humans that are winning all these things for Spain, even though economically right now things might not be that great. And I have a lot of Spanish friends who remember that piece of content that Nike put out, and they said, it really articulated the feeling in the country at the time that was pretty bleak, but there are these moments like winning the Football World Cup, which was incredible, that really brought the country together and made everyone feel really happy and joyful and hopeful.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example. I love it. It's very beautiful. So let me ask you a question about your temperament and your personality. So temperament, you're kind of born with a certain predisposition and then shaped, of course, by the forces around you. And then personality gets added on as you come to challenges, or some of them you don't meet and some of them you overcome in a great way. And it's, all of that forms who you are. So what would you say you're born with temperament-wise, and what did you add on to your personality?
I love helping people. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a school teacher, I think because my mom's a school teacher, but I've always loved sort of that coaching, that mentoring, that helping people. It's something I've always naturally enjoyed doing, and feel like with my business now, I've come full circle of wanting to be a school teacher when I was 9 to now actually teaching people and coaching people, which is wonderful. But again, Nike had a culture of coaching and mentoring, and really as a leader, you were expected to sort of help people in your team in a way that was more like coaching them and helping them be better at their roles and helping them see their potential. And I really felt that when I worked there. I loved that side of it. And my best memories of Nike are some amazing campaigns we've launched. There were some incredible athletes I met, but the happiest memories are the connections I made and the people I got to mentor, or the people I got to be mentored by. And I think that's something that has naturally always been there for me. And, in terms of the personality that I've developed, I think, as we talked about at the beginning, I think, going overseas and taking opportunities that were there for me and being brave enough to step out on my own sometimes, even though it was really scary, I think has shaped my personality a lot. I think when you're stepping out of your comfort zone, you find things out about yourself that you probably wouldn't have realized or wouldn't have seen otherwise. And I think you notice maybe you're stronger than you thought, or you're more resilient than you thought. And I think that only happens when you really push yourself out of your comfort zone. And I've definitely got more comfortable with pushing myself out of my comfort zone the older I've got, and I can see the benefit of it. And it's something I try to do regularly so that I can keep growing and learning and not get stuck anywhere.
Sounds like that all started when you were 15.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that realization when I was 15 that the worst possible outcome did happen, but I survived and I got through it. And then after that, it was wonderful. So yeah, the learning is that even if you push yourself out of your comfort zone and it doesn't work out and the worst does happen, you'll be okay and you'll get through it. And there's wonderful stuff further down the line.
From great crisis comes great victory.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Mm-hmm. So what about a time when you might have experienced a sense of cultural disconnect? I'm sure you've had that experience many times because you're moving countries, but you're also moving companies. And when you move to a different company, there's how we do things around here is different everywhere. And often that becomes visible to us through some small thing that happens. It might be the way people treat each other in the subway from one place to another, or it can be that in a restaurant, do or don't serve in a certain way that you're expecting. Just listening to a German podcast, I'm trying to improve my German, and they were talking about the poor service culture in Germany. And I thought it was pretty good in comparison to other countries that I've been to, but they were talking about this whole sense of that. So the cultural disconnect that they are concerned about is foreigners coming to Germany and feeling that they have had very poor service. And if you were one of those customers and you experiencing that, that could have been a shock to you. So what about you? When is there a time that you experienced a sort of cultural shock moment?
Yeah, I have a very clear one, and it's one that I think many people will be able to relate to if they've moved countries. But when you leave a country for, the country of your birth, the country that you grew up in, and it's part of your identity. I lived in New Zealand till I was an adult, and it's definitely part of who I am. It's where I grew up. It's where my roots are. But then I went to England for 17 years. And the longer you're away, the more disconnected you come from your homeland. And whether you like it or not, the experience of being overseas does sort of change who you are. And coming back to New Zealand, I didn't feel it in the early years, but the longer I stayed in the UK, the more I would come home to New Zealand and just feel really disconnected to the country. And I had people warn me about this. I remember a family friend who had lived overseas for a very long time said, you do have a reverse culture shock where you come back to your home country and it's a culture shock. And it can be really hard to reconcile because your nationality usually is tied up with your identity in many ways. And so I definitely struggled with that. I have struggled with sort of your place in the world. I am British in many ways. I have my British citizenship. I feel British. I love the country. I chose to be British. When I took that citizenship, I am a dual citizen of both countries. But when I'm in the UK, I'm not as British as everybody else. And when I'm in New Zealand, I don't feel as much of a Kiwi as other people do. And you sort of fall down in this middle place where you don't fully feel like you belong to either country. It can be challenging at times when you don't see yourself reflected fully in either place. It's certainly a blessing. Don't get me wrong. It is a blessing to be able to call two countries home and to have had the wonderful experiences that I've had in my life. It's certainly not a complaint from my side, but it was something that I didn't fully expect until it happened. And it's weird to feel disconnected from the country of your birth that you've always identified with and always called home.
Well, two things happen. You change, and the country that you're living in changes. And then the country that you called home initially also changes. So you're not going back to something that's static. You're going back to something that's changed. So it would make sense that you'd have a disconnect.
Yeah.
We always have this idea in our mind that the country that we leave or the place that we leave or even people, a home that they used to live in, they think it's not going to change or that it shouldn't change. But it does change. And then when you go back, it's a shock to the system. Do you have any specific incidents that stand out in your mind?
Well, when I went to Milan, and this is a very, very tiny example of it, but it was almost foreshadowing what was going to come in the future. But I went to Milan for only 6 months, and I came back from Milan, and there was a song that had come out from a New Zealand artist, a very catchy song. It's a very, very famous song in New Zealand. If anyone from New Zealand's listening to this podcast, they'll know it. I think the song's called Not Many, If Any. It's by an artist called Scribe. And there's a line, and he says not many, and then the next line of that is if any. And I came back to New Zealand, and people would say like not many, and then someone else would finish off and say if any. And I was like, what is this thing I've missed? Like everybody was saying it. And eventually someone explained it to me. And I was like, God, I was only gone for 6 months, and I missed this huge sort of musical cultural moment. And I guess being away for 17 years feels like 17 years of that. You know, you come back and you're like, I don't know what that is. I don't know who this celebrity is. I don't know about this thing that happened in the news 10 years ago that was really massive that people still talk about. And there's all these things that happened in the time you were gone that you literally don't know anything about. And it feels weird to not know these things. And yeah, 17 years of it definitely feels like quite disconnected after a while.
Yeah, you feel like somehow I should know this because this is my country of birth. But why should you? Because you weren't there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. I often feel that way. So I know exactly what you're describing. In fact, I think it's been written about as third culture. People develop this sense of third culture where they don't really belong anywhere, but they have a foot in many worlds, or maybe one limb in multiple worlds. And so they're feeling a sense of rootlessness, but a sense of really appreciation for the breadth and the excitement of learning something new and then having that become part of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of other New Zealanders and certainly other cultures in London. I've got American friends who have left the States, 20 years ago, and they go back to the States and feel the exact same thing that I feel. So it's not unique to me, obviously. And it's comforting when you do speak to other people who understand it, because that's when you sort of feel like, hey, I'm not alone in this. But it's absolutely a blessing as well. It's so wonderful to have had the opportunity to live in both countries. When I did my citizenship ceremony for the UK, I sort of went there thinking it was a formality and you had to go there and swear your allegiance to the Queen and, become a British citizen and promise to be a good citizen and things like that. And I just went by myself. It was during the day and I sort of took some time off work and went. And when I got there, there was people from all over the world. I think there was 32 different nationalities at this citizenship ceremony who were all becoming British citizens. And so many people had brought their whole families with them. They brought so many guests because it was such a massive moment for them. And it really dawned on me as the ceremony was continuing, like what an incredible thing I was about to do. I was taking citizenship of another country. And my grandfather was British. He was born in London and he moved to New Zealand. And that's how I was able to get British citizenship. So there was sort of a bit of a closing of a loop between me and my grandfather. And I thought about that during the singing of God Save the Queen. And I started crying and I was really overcome with emotion.
So moving.
Yeah.
That's so moving.
And I really thought about what the United Kingdom and particularly what London had given me, the opportunities, the career I'd had, the friendships I'd made. It was this moment that I just didn't expect. And I stood there getting my British citizenship and all these thoughts of what a wonderful experience I'd had and how lucky I'd been to come and live in this country. And getting that citizenship was, my acknowledgement of what the United Kingdom had given me and the opportunities it had given me. And I did not expect to be overwhelmed the way I did. And looking back, I'm like, of course, it's a big thing taking on a citizenship of another country. But I think I took it quite lightly before the ceremony. And afterwards, I was like, it's pretty special. And I feel incredibly lucky.
I had the same experience. I have two daughter-in-laws from different countries, and I've worked a lot with the immigrant community, helping people find work and also start businesses. And so I've been to quite a few citizenship ceremonies, and I weep every time, even if I only know the person a little bit or I've only known them for a while. Just when they become citizens, I'm just so overcome. It's such a beautiful experience. I don't know if it's the same in all countries, but it sounds like in the UK, it's very similar to what we have in Canada, where it's just such a celebration and it's such a United Nations moment. You realize that you being a citizen of the country means you're also more deeply a citizen of the world. And so one day our daughter-in-law came home and she said, well, today I became a Canadian citizen. And I went, what? You went to the citizenship ceremony and you didn't tell us? And she said, I realized when I was there that I should have.
That was my experience as well. I realized when I was there, I was like, I should have brought some of my close British friends because I have a lot of very close British friends. I thought that would have been really nice for them to see me become a fellow citizen of their country. But similar to her, I didn't really appreciate how significant it would feel to me until I got there. I think I appreciated that, certainly there's countries in the world who their passport doesn't allow them to travel as much as a British passport. And there's, being able to stay in the UK for the rest of their lives is definitely, something that changes their lives. I appreciate that there's countries like that. And I thought about that and how wonderful that must be in terms of the full service. But I hadn't really thought about how I would feel. I thought I'd just kind of go in there and get it and leave. And yeah, when I started crying halfway through, I was like, oh my God, I'm really feeling this ceremony.
There's a French movie about this very traditional conservative French couple. They have 4 beautiful daughters, and each of their daughters marries somebody from a different race and culture. And their parents are completely overcome with how, oh, no, they are not sure they like this idea, right? And so there you see them trying to connect with their new son-in-laws. And there's a moment where the French father is in the basement and his son-in-laws start to talk about how meaningful it is for them to be French citizens. And then one of them puts his right hand over his heart and he starts to sing the French national anthem. And all the others join in and they sing it beautifully with great gusto. And the father tries to sing along and he doesn't even know the words to the national anthem of his own country. And he is so embarrassed that he doesn't know it. And he's so moved by their allegiance to the country that all his prejudice just dissolves in that moment.
Yeah, it's a significant thing to choose to take a nationality. I have a lot of British friends where you have to do a test called Life in the UK, and it's just about life in the UK. You have to study and you do this test as part of your citizenship. And there's things that I learned in the Life in the UK that I'd tell my British friends and they'd all stare at me blankly and they'd be like, oh, I didn't know that. And you're like, well, you wouldn't pass the test.
I know, it's so ironic. So a couple more questions before we end our interview. The next one is just that I'm wondering, what does it take for you to be at your best? What kind of workplace climate brings out the best in Stephanie Brown?
I definitely think, I've mentioned it a couple of times, but anywhere that I'm learning and being challenged, I look back in my career and it was one of my early roles at Nike where I got stuck in the role. Entirely my own fault. I sort of hadn't been very vocal about where I wanted to go next. I wasn't reaching out to people to understand, the path that I could follow through Nike. And I sort of got stuck in this role for, I think it was about 3, almost 4 years. And the last 18 months of that, I was in such a tough place mentally because I was so bored with the role. I wasn't being challenged anymore. But at the same time, I was struggling to work out how I moved into that next role. And thankfully, with the help of 2 of my mentors at Nike, 2 more senior guys that were on the senior leadership team, they both helped me to move into another role. And they were really proactive and talking to people about getting me out. And what that taught me is, one, it's good to have good people in your corner. Both of these guys were amazing. I still talk to both of them now, and they were incredible in helping me get into that next role. But also for me personally, I'm not someone that can do the same thing sort of monotonously. I want to be learning. I want to be growing. I love being challenged. I hate the feeling of quote unquote failure, but I understand the role it plays in growth. And therefore, when I experience it, it hurts like it does for everyone. But I certainly reframe it and take the lessons from it and move forward. And so any environment where I can be challenged, where I can learn, where I can keep growing is an environment that I've always thrived in.
Awesome. So here's your soapbox moment. What would you like to promote?
Well, in terms of sort of lessons from my career, I mean, one thing I would say that I do feel really passionately about, probably in part because I did have so many wonderful leaders at Nike. Had some wonderful leaders at Apple as well, but there was definitely an overabundance of great leaders in the Nike London office when I was there. I feel really passionately that, leadership is a privilege. I think there's a lot of leaders that are doing a poor job and it's not necessarily their fault. I think we need to help people become better leaders. And I think in the workplace, if we have better leadership across the board in all industries and all workplaces, people would be a lot happier. People's lives would be happy, not just their careers, their whole lives. Most people leave jobs because they have poor managers or poor leaders leading companies and leading teams. And I just think if we can get that right, I think if we can teach people that actually it's a real privilege to get to lead, to impact and influence the team that you're leading, to know that if you're a great leader, it is actually making their life more enjoyable. That's incredible power to have, quote unquote, the word power. But I think it gets used in the wrong way in many organizations. And it's a shame because a lot of people that I meet in my line of work, in terms of my clients and people that are coming to join my program, where I'm literally helping people get new jobs. So I know all the reasons that they're leaving their current jobs. And so much of it is poor leadership. And a lot of them don't even necessarily want to leave their jobs. They like maybe the brand or the company, but they've got poor leaders and they want to get out. And so I just feel like if people sort of saw leadership as more of a privilege and saw leadership as something that's a blessing, it make the workplace so much more enjoyable for people.
That's a lovely message. Leadership is a privilege and a blessing.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else you would like to say?
I mean, in terms of the work I do with the Creative Career Level Up, again, I really am on a mission to help people find jobs that they love. The experience that I went through after I left Nike, I went to a job that didn't work out and I got let go in my probationary period. And I then went on a sort of 8-month journey of trying to work out what I wanted to do. My confidence was in the ground. I was really struggling to get a job, even though I had arguably a wonderful CV with 8 years at Nike on it. And I think what I identified was, I didn't really know what my strengths were. I didn't really know what environments I did well in. I needed to do the self-reflection to understand where I was going to do well. And I think when I left Nike, the company that I went to, that I got let go from, was a small company. It had a founder who was in charge, who sort of made a lot of the decisions. There wasn't a lot of autonomy, and I didn't do well in that environment. I wasn't happy there. Even though they let me go, I was happy for them to let me. I was relieved, I think is the word, when that happened. And so I did a lot of reflection, and I sort of came back and I realized what needed to be in place in a work environment for me to do well. And once I knew that, I could then work out the companies that would be the right place for me. And most people, when they job hunt, and most people, when they end up in the wrong job, it's because they start with, what are the companies I want to work for? Or they start with looking on LinkedIn at who's hiring today. Oh, I'll apply for that, or I'll apply for this. And they don't do that work up front to really understand, is this the right environment for me? And Nike's a great example. People say to me all the time, Nike would be my dream job. And I'm like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know your personality yet. Once I know that, once I know what your motivations are, once I know what your values are, then I'll be able to tell you whether I think you'd enjoy working at Nike or not. But it starts with you and who you are, and you build out from there and find the right place for you. Don't do it the other way around. And I feel really passionate about that. I feel really passionate about helping people understand themselves well enough to then be able to go out and find the right places where they're going to fit and where they're really going to thrive. Because if you're in the wrong environment, like I was when I went to the startup and I got let go, I was in the wrong environment. I was underperforming in that environment because I was in the wrong environment. And it wasn't that I was bad at my job. It's just that in that environment, I couldn't do my best work. And when I got to Apple, it was completely the opposite. The first day at Apple, I was like, these are my people. I get this company. I understand it. I felt really at home. I felt like I was going to do great work there. I felt like it was the right environment for me. It wouldn't be the right environment for everyone. So again, you've got to work out where that is. But even if you're wonderful at your job, if you're in the wrong place, you're going to struggle. And it's about doing the work to find out where the right place is for you first, so that you can end up in an environment where you can thrive and do great work.
Awesome. That sounds like a good place for us to end. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciated you taking the time and for sharing your wonderful insights.
Oh, thank you, Maria. This has been a really, really wonderful chat. Thank you for taking the time as well.
Stephanie Brown has had a life marked by great successes and sudden, unexpected challenges. From being one of the popular kids in her village school to one of the most rejected and bullied girls in an all-girls high school, she learned to detach her life goals from the expectation that her friends should accompany her. From being in a supportive and creative environment at Nike to being fired from a small startup job and experiencing unemployment for 8 months, Stephanie learned to look for the right work environment where she could thrive instead of looking for a job or a company. Here are 3 culture and leadership tips I picked up from Stephanie's interview. Number 1, unexpected crisis can lead to unexpected victory. Number 2, working at a great company doesn't ensure that future career experiences will be great. Forge your own path to success. Number 3, when you feel like you don't belong in any culture, develop friendships with other cultural learners and enjoy those dual citizenship moments. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend and review it by going to our website, shiftworkplace.com/podcast, where all the links will be in one place. And if you would like to talk to me about how your operations people can become outstanding managers, your C-suite can align vision with operations, explore how you can heal from workplace or career trauma, book a Work With Me 30-minute free call at calendly.com/Marie Shift Workplace. That's calendly.com/Marie Shift Workplace. Thank you for listening, and may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day. Newsflash. Listeners can now interact with Culture and Leadership Connections podcast by leaving a voice or text message on Fan List. It is a fun and quick way to let me know what you liked, ask a question, or leave a suggestion. I will feature some of the voice messages on upcoming episodes. You might be surprised to hear your own voice, but only if you leave a message, of course. So to leave your personal message or your question, go to shiftworkplace.com/podcast and click on the Fan List link to leave it. I can hardly wait to hear what you have to say.